The signal came at third watch when most of the station slept. Commander Voss was not sleeping. He never slept well on Outpost Krev. Station sat at the edge of Verk-controlled space, a cold metal ring, floating between two dead moons, and it had a way of making a soldier feel small. Voss had served the Verk Empire for 30 years. He had put down rebellions on 6 worlds. He had watched sons die. He did not rattle easily. But the signal rattled him. He was at his console, reviewing patrol logs that said nothing interesting when every alarm on the station went off at the same time, not the soft yellow pulse of a meteor cluster, not the orange buzz of an unregistered freighter crossing the boundary, every alarm, the red ones, the kind that had not gone off in Voss's lifetime because the Verk Empire had not had an enemy worth fearing in 400 years. He stood up, his tea went cold. Report, he said. Sensor Officer Doc was already at her station, her 4 fingers moving across the display panel so fast they blurred. She was young, good at her job, right? Now her face had gone the pale gray color of old ash. Commander, she said, I don't know what I'm looking at. That was not a thing, Doc said. That was not a thing any trained sensor officer said. Voss crossed the room in 5 steps. He looked at the display. The display showed a vessel. It had appeared in Sector 9, which was nothing. Sector 9 was empty space, a long cold corridor between the Verk border and the dead system of Arith. Nothing lived in Sector 9. Nothing traveled through it. There was no reason to travel through it. It led nowhere of value. The vessel was sitting in the middle of it. It was not moving. It was not transmitting. It was not responding to the automated border challenge that the station had already sent 3 times. It was just sitting there in the dark in the middle of a corridor that ships did not use, and it was doing nothing. Voss studied the shape of it on the sensor screen. It was long, longer than anything he had seen outside of an Empire war carrier. But it was not shaped like a war carrier. It was not shaped like any vessel in the Verk registry, and Voss knew that registry the way he knew his own name. He had memorized it as a cadet, every ship class of every known species. The Orvani with their round spinning discs, the Thrax with their needle-shaped frigates, the scattered colony ships of the lesser races, small and graceful and no threat to anyone. This was none of those. It was roughly cylindrical but not cleanly so. It had angles, hard, flat angles along its hull that had no purpose he could identify, not weapon ports, not engine housings, just flat plates of what read on the sensors as thick, dense metal layered over each other like the scales of something armored. The front end came to a blunt point. The rear end was wide and had a cluster of exhaust ports that were at this moment completely cold. The ship had not just dropped out of faster than light travel. It had not burned engines to stop. It was just there, as if it had always been there, and the universe had simply not noticed it before. How long has it been in the sector? Voss asked. Doc shook her head. That's the problem, Commander. I can't tell. The sensor logs show nothing. No arrival event, no energy spike, no transition signature. It's as if the ship materialized. Ships don't materialize. No, Doc said they don't. Voss straightened up. He looked at the signal strength at the mass reading at the heat signature of the vessel's hull. The hull was cold, but not dead cold. There was a faint warmth to it, like something that had been running for a long time and had recently gone quiet. Like a machine holding its breath. "Get me a full spectrum scan," he said. "Everything we have." "I already ran one." "Run it again." Doc ran it again. The results were they same. The vessel was real. It was solid. It was big, roughly 900 m from nose to stern, which put it in the class of a heavy cruiser, though its mass reading was strange. It was heavier than it should be for its size, denser, as if every centimeter of it was packed with something. Voss sent the first contact protocol, standard greeting and the 17 trade languages of the known galaxy. He did not expect an answer. He sent it because protocol said to, and because he needed something to do with his hands while his brain worked through what he was looking at. He sent it. The vessel did nothing. He sent it again. Still nothing. "Could it be derelict?" asked Lieutenant Heron from across the room. He was new. He had a hopeful face, the kind that still believed there were simple answers. Derelict ships don't appear in empty sectors without a transit signature. Voss said. He did not look at Heron. He kept looking at the display. He sent a priority message to Vark Fleet Command. He described what he was seeing. He attached the sensor data. He put it in the highest urgency category, the station's communication system. Aloud. Then he waited. While he waited, he kept watching the vessel. It sat in Sector 9 like a held breath. None of his instruments could tell him what was inside it. The whole material was blocking deep scans. That alone was worth reporting. Verk. Deep scan technology could punch through a planet's mantle, whatever that hole was made of. It was stopping the signal. Cold. Fleet Command responded in 40 minutes. The response was 4 words: hold. Position, do not engage. Then 6 minutes later, a second message. Admiral Kreth is coming. Voss had met Admiral Kreth twice. She was not the kind of admiral who left her flagship for nothing. She was the kind of admiral who had crushed the Orvani rebellion with 11 ships and a level of patience that bordered on terrifying. She collected intelligence the way other admirals collected victories. She did not move unless she understood what she was moving toward. The fact that she was coming here told Voss something important. Fleet Command was scared. It took Kreth's fleet 22 hours to reach Outpost Creve. During those 22 hours, the vessel in Sector 9 did not move. It did not transmit. It did not power up its engines or change its orientation by a single degree. It sat. Voss had 3 shifts of sensor officers monitoring it. Continuously, they reported the same thing every 30 minutes. Nothing. The ship was doing nothing. But it was there. It kept being there. And somehow that was worse than if it had done something. Admiral Kreth arrived on the station at the head of a small staff and studied the sensor data for 2 hours without saying a word that wasn't a question. She asked about the whole material. She asked about the exhaust configuration. She asked about the mass reading 3 separate times. Voss answered everything. He knew and admitted clearly what he did not know. Kreth had deep, steady eyes the color of old amber. She looked at the display for a long time. "That ship is not in any registry," she said. "No, Admiral. Not Orvani, not Thrax, not any of the colony species. No. And you received no signal." None. She looked at the display a moment. Longer than she said something that surprised him because Kreth never speculated out loud. Someone built that ship who we have never met, she said, and they chose to park it in our space. Voss said nothing because she was right. And there was nothing to add to that. Kreth brought a fleet of 30 ships. She positioned them in a broad arc at the boundary of Sector 9, not threatening a conversation posture. She called it. She sent her own first contact protocol in every language the Empire knew, including the dead ones, including 2 that were only half translated. The vessel did nothing. She sent a type beam communication in mathematical sequences, primes, then geometric ratios, basic signals that any species capable of building a ship of that class should recognize as intentional. The vessel did nothing. On the second day, something changed. Not on the vessel, on the station, a low frequency signal began appearing on the lower bands of the communication spectrum, barely above background noise. Doc almost missed it. She caught it because she was thorough and because she had been staring at that display for 48 hours and had learned the shape of the background radiation the way a person learns the sounds of their own home. She pulled the signal out of the noise. She cleaned it up. She ran it through the translation matrices. It was not in any of the 17 trade languages. It was not in any of the dead languages. It was not in mathematical sequences. It was something else entirely. The tones had a pattern. The pattern had a rhythm. The rhythm had a structure that looked just barely like language, not a language Doc knew. Not a language anyone on the station knew, but a language, something that had been built by minds, spoken by mouths, or whatever passed for mouths, shaped by a long history of being used to mean things. Kraft listened to it. She listened to it. Played at normal speed, then slowed down, then broken into segments. They're talking to us, she said. They just haven't decided to speak in a way we understand yet. Which meant one of 2 things. Either the species inside that vessel was completely ignorant of every language form in the known galaxy, which suggested they came from somewhere very far away and very isolated, or they knew the Verk Empire did not have their language and they were choosing to communicate on their own terms. Neither option was comfortable. On the 3rd day, Voss was standing at the observation window at the far end of the station's command deck, looking out at the stars and not really seeing them, when Doc called him over with a voice that had gone very quiet. He came. He looked at the display. The vessel in Sector 9 was moving. It was moving slowly, and it was moving toward them. Not fast, not aggressive, the way something large moves when it is choosing to be careful. The engines, the same engines that had been cold for 3 days, were now running at a low burn, just enough to push that massive frame forward at a pace that was almost gentle. It's coming here, Harren said. Yes, Voss agreed. Should we move back? Voss thought about the 30 ships outside, arranged in their conversation arc. He thought about Kreth and her patient amber eyes. He thought about the 3 days of silence and the signal that sounded like a language and the hole that ate scanner beams and the ship that had appeared without arriving. No, he said, we hold. The vessel crossed Sector 9 over the course of 16 hours. It did not speed up. It did not change course. It came toward them the way a person walks toward a Lock door when they are fairly sure. They have the key. When it stopped, it was at the edge of Kreth's fleet formation, not inside it. At the edge where there was space and clear sight lines in every direction. And then it did something that no one on the station had expected. It opened. Not a weapon port, not a missile bay, a bay door wide and slow on the ventral side of the hull. It opened the way. Hand opens deliberately, showing empty space inside. And from that space, a single small ship emerged. It was tiny next to the vessel, tiny next to anything in Kreth's fleet. It was a shuttle or something built for the same purpose as a shuttle. It had the same hard angles as the larger ship, the same layered plating, but it was small enough that a cruiser could have held a dozen of them. It drifted out into open space. It stopped. Doc pulled up a close sensor, read on the shuttle. The deep scan hit the hull and scattered just like it did on the larger ship. No reading on the interior, no reading on how many were inside. But there was one thing the sensors caught. Because it was on the surface of the shuttle, not inside it. Markings, symbols painted or etched into the plating in a color that showed bright on the sensor display. The translation matrix took 30 seconds to cycle through its database. It found nothing for the symbols themselves, but the matrix did something else. It analyzed the structure of the symbols, their arrangement, the way they were grouped, and it said probable designation, probable name, probable identification, marker. The vessel had introduced itself. Voss leaned close to the screen and looked at the symbols for a long time. He would not know their meaning for weeks. He would not understand them fully for much longer than that. But standing there in the cold light of the command deck, while Kreth's 30 ships floated in their arc and the huge vessel sat in Sector 9 like something that had always been planning to arrive, he felt something he had not felt in 30 years of service. He felt the specific cold of standing in front of something you cannot measure. In the fleet, 3 decks below Admiral Kreth's command station, a signals officer named Pax was running the symbols through every cross-reference system available to the Empire. She would work through the night. She would find by morning, through a chain of comparative linguistics that took 12 steps and 2 assumptions, a partial translation, not the name of the ship, not the name of the species. 2 words, just 2, scratched into the plating like a warning someone had been kind enough to make decorative. They said, "We're here." The Empire had been the undisputed authority of the known galaxy for 400 years. It had never been surprised. It was surprised now. The shuttle did not respond to hails. It sat in open space, 50 km from the nearest Verk ship, and it did nothing. It did not move. It did not transmit. It floated there in the dark like a question that refused to become an answer. Admiral Kreth spent 3 hours running every communication protocol in the fleet's library at the shuttle. She was a patient woman. She had once waited 11 days for a cornered rebel commander to run out of food before accepting his surrender. 3 hours was nothing. But by the end of those 3 hours, something had shifted in the large vessel behind the shuttle. Sensors picked it up first, a change in the energy output from the ship's core. Not a weapon charge, not an engine burn. Something else, a broad spectrum. A mission that spread outward from the vessel like a slow wave. It washed over Kreth's fleet. It washed over Outpost Creve. It washed over Commander Voss, who was standing at his console watching the readout, and he felt this was the part he struggled to explain in his report. Later he felt nothing, physically. Nothing, no pain, no sensation, no effect. The wave passed through the station and left no trace on any instrument, except one. The communications board lit up, not with a signal from the shuttle, from the large vessel itself, a direct, clear transmission on a frequency the fleet used for internal communications, a frequency that was not public, a frequency that outside ships were not supposed to know. The signal was audio only. Voss listened to it with Kreth standing at his shoulder. It was a voice, one voice speaking, clearly without distortion. It was speaking the Verk trade language, not perfectly. There were small errors in the tone markers, and the accent was unlike any regional variation Voss had heard, but it was the trade language, spoken by something that had clearly learned it recently in the last few hours from the communications Kreth's fleet had been sending at the shuttle. The voice said, "We know you've been trying to talk to us. We figured out your language. It's a little complicated, but we got the main parts. We want to have a conversation, just a conversation. We're not here for trouble. You can keep your weapons aimed at us if it makes you more comfortable. We don't mind." The transmission ended. Kreth did not move for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "They learned our trade language from 3 hours of hails." Voss said nothing. "That is not normal," Kreth said. "No, Admiral." Kreth straightened. She had the look she got when a problem stopped being a problem and started being something she needed to take apart carefully. "Open a response channel," she said. The communications officer opened it. Kreth spoke in the trade language, formally, the way she would open a meeting with a foreign head of state. She identified herself. She identified the Empire. She asked the standard questions. "Who are you? Where do you come from? What is your purpose here?" The response came back in under a minute. The voice was the same voice, easy, almost casual. It said, "We're humans. We come from a planet called Earth. It's a long way from here, about 4,000 light years in what you call the Galactic South. We're out here because we lost a ship, a colony ship, about 600 people on it. It went off course about 3 years ago. Our tracking put the last known position somewhere in the sector. We're looking for it. We didn't mean to cross into your space if this is your space. We didn't know there was anyone out here." Silence on the Verk end of the channel. Voss looked at Kreth. Kreth was looking at the sensor display, where the large vessel sat with the patience of something very old. She said to Voss, "Not over the channel. 4,000 light years." "Yes, Admiral. There is nothing in the Galactic South." "No," Voss said, "there isn't." They both knew the maps. The Verk Empire had extensive stellar cartography going back 800 years. The Galactic South was a long stretch of ordinary stars and empty system. No civilizations had been found. There no signals, no ruins, no signs that anything had ever looked up from a planet and wondered what was above it. Nothing. And yet, their ship is 900 m long, Voss said carefully, and they claim to be looking for a colony ship they lost. Kreth looked at him. They travel 4,000 light years to look for missing people, he said. Kreth turned back to the channel. She asked to see the vessels. Identification, proof of origin, any documentation. Response was immediate. A data package arrived, not a small one. It was enormous. It contained star charts, biological records, historical documents, all of it labeled in a script. The translation matrix did not recognize, but much of it, the charts, the images, did not need translation. The star charts showed a galaxy from a perspective centered on a small yellow star in a system the Verk maps called Designation 7 Aerith Minor, a star that had never been flagged as interesting, a star too far south to matter, a star with a small blue planet circling it at the right distance for liquid water. Krath went over the data for 6 hours. She pulled in her best analysts, her intelligence officers, her xenobiologists. They went through everything. The conclusion was uncomfortable. The species called humans had been in space for roughly 200 years. In 200 years, they had developed a faster-than-light drive, built ships of the class now sitting in Sector 9, and apparently lost a colony ship full of 600 people, and then traveled 4,000 light-years to find it. Their technology was not superior to the Empire's in every area. Their weapon systems were hard to read. Their whole material was unfamiliar, but their structural engineering and their engines were clearly good, possibly very good. The fact that the large vessel had crossed 4,000 light-years and arrived in Sector 9 without triggering a single border alarm until it stopped moving said something about their propulsion. What it said was they were fast, very fast and very quiet. 200 years, Voss kept thinking. 200 years. And they were here, knocking on the Empire's door 4,000 light-years from their home, looking for missing people. Like it was a reasonable thing to do. Krath sent a second message. She told the humans that they had entered sovereign Verk space without permission. She told them that the Empire took border security seriously. She told them that they were required to power down their vessel, submit to a full inspection, and wait for a formal diplomatic process to begin before any further movement would be permitted. She put it politely. Kreth always put things politely. The response took longer this time. 5 minutes of quiet, then the same voice. "We understand your position," it said. "We respect that this is your space. We'll power down anything you want us to power down. We'll answer any questions you have, but we'd like to keep looking for our people. While we do that, we can do both. We're good at doing multiple things at once." Voss almost smiled. He stopped himself. "They're not afraid," Harren said from across the room. He sounded baffled. Voss looked at the display. 30 Verk ships in a formation designed to be read as overwhelming force, and the humans were offering to multitask. "No," Voss agreed, "they're not." This was when the problem became political. Fleet Command, receiving Kreth's reports every 2 hours, escalated the matter to the Imperial Senate. The Senate escalated it to the Emperor. The Emperor, whose name was Zal and who had ruled the Verk Empire for 60 years, through a combination of intelligence, cruelty, and excellent timing, read the reports and did what emperors do when something confuses them and they do not want to admit it. He sent more ships. 140 ships arrived in the sector over the next 4 days, battle cruisers, destroyers, 2 dreadnoughts. They formed a wall of force at the edge of Sector 9. They were there to make a point. The point was, you are small, we are large. This conversation is happening on our terms. The human vessel watched the ships arrive. It did not power up. It did not move. The shuttle that had drifted out of the bay was still there, still quiet, still floating with that infuriating patience. On the fifth day, a new voice came through on the channel, not the first voice, deeper, slower, with a different accent entirely. This one said, "We see you've brought more ships. That's fine. We'd still like to talk, but we want to be clear about something. We're not leaving until we find our people. That's not a threat. We're not threatening you. It's just they're ours. We don't leave our people behind. That's a thing about us." Kreth sent back, "You are within controlled space. Your search will proceed only with Imperial authorization." The voice said, "We're working on that." On the sixth day, 3 things happened. The first thing was that the deep scan team found something new in the sensor data from the large vessel. A reading they had been filtering out as noise because it didn't make sense. When they stopped filtering it, it resolved into a pattern. The pattern was structural. The hull that ate scanner beams. The hull that blocked everything was not uniform. There were layers: outer armor, inner armor, between them something else, something the sensors could not identify because they had no reference for it, but which read as dense and regular and deliberate. Whatever was between those layers of hull plating, someone had put it there on purpose. The second thing was a message from the Emperor, not to Kreth, to the humans, directly routed through Kreth's communication system without her authorization. A short message, cold and formal, telling the vessel that it had 24 hours to exit Verk space or face consequences. Kreth read the transcript of the message and pressed her lips together and said nothing out loud about the fact that the Emperor had gone around her. The third thing was the human response to that message. It was short, shorter than anything they had sent so far. The second voice, the deep, slow one, came back on the channel and said, "We hear you. We'll be out of your space in 24 hours if you help us find our people in that time. If you don't, we'll still be looking. We'll try not to be in your way while we do it." The channel closed. Voss, who had been on duty for 20 hours straight, stood very still in the middle of the command deck and looked at nothing in particular. Heron broke the silence. He said, genuinely puzzled, "Are they being polite or are they making a threat?" Voss thought about it. "Both," he said. "I think that's just how they talk." At the 23-hour mark, the large vessel powered up its engines. Not to leave. It moved into the debris field on the far side of Sector 9, a scattering of ancient rock and ice that the Verk had never bothered to map properly because there was nothing in it worth caring about. It moved into the debris field and it began a slow, methodical scan of the area, looking for the colony ship. The 24 hours ended. Admiral Kreth had her orders. She had been given them in writing officially by the Emperor's own office. She had read them 3 times. She had sent 2 requests for clarification, both of which were denied. The orders were clear, and they were final. She sat in the command seat of her flagship and looked at the display for a long moment. Then she gave the order. 12 Verk destroyers moved toward the large vessel. They sent one last warning, protocol. Required it, the warning said stop. Your activity, power down or we open fire. The large vessel kept scanning. The first Verk destroyer fired a warning. Shot a low-power energy discharge. Across the bow, not meant to hit, meant to communicate. It hit. Not because the gunner missed the shot. Went exactly where it was aimed, clear. Space 20 m off the vessel's forward hull. It hit because the vessel moved. Not much, a small correction, the kind of micro-adjustment a ship makes when it's fine-tuning a scan position. A tiny movement that shifted its position by exactly 20 m, so that the warning shot struck its hull. Voss watched this on the display and felt his stomach drop because he did not know whether that had been an accident or a choice. He did not have long to think about it. The large vessel stopped scanning. All along its hull, the flat armored plates, the ones with no obvious purpose, the ones the analysts had been puzzling over for 6 days, began to move. The flat armored plates opened like the wings of something that had been waiting a long time to fly. Voss counted them on the display, 42. Separate panels along the hull's doors. Side alone, they folded back smoothly, with no hesitation. The way the pieces of a very old machine move when the person running it knows exactly what they're doing. Beneath each panel was something that read on the sensors as a barrel. Long, dense, cold, still cold, not charged, not active. 42 guns on the dorsal side. Voss turned the sensor sweep to the ventral side, the same the port and starboard flanks, the same the forward section, which had looked like a blunt prow, now had 4 of its own panels open. The rear cluster was still closed, but the sensors were picking up a charge building in the engine housings that had nothing to do with propulsion. In less than 30 seconds, a ship that had looked like a traveling vessel had become something else. It had become a warship, one of the 12 destroyers moving toward it. The one closest, 6 km off the vessel's starboard side, pulled up hard. The pilot panicked, or the captain gave the right order at the wrong speed. Ship banked and the maneuver put it briefly broadside to the human vessel. The human vessel fired once. Just once. The round that came out of the forward port gun was not energy-based. The sensors screamed, trying to classify it. It was solid metal, moving at a velocity that the sensor array registered, flagged as impossible, and then registered again because it was real. A solid metal projectile, dense as collapsed rock, moving at a fraction below light speed. It hit the destroyer before the light from the muzzle flash reached Voss's display. The destroyer was not there anymore. Voss had seen ships destroyed before. He had seen ships hit by standard energy weapons, by missile strikes, by plasma charges. He had seen the slow flowering of fire in vacuum and the spinning debris clouds. This was not that. The destroyer simply stopped being a destroyer and became a field of very small pieces moving outward very fast. There was no fire. Fire needed air. There was just the pieces spreading in a perfect sphere, and then the sphere dispersing into the dark. On the open fleet channel, silence. 3 full seconds of silence, which in a military engagement was a very long time. Then every ship in Kreth's formation moved at once. They moved the way trained military crews move when protocol takes over from thinking. Formation, fire, maximum range. Cover the fleet, suppress the target. 12. Destroyers became 11, and then all 11 were firing, and behind them the cruisers opened up and the two dreadnoughts began cycling their main guns. The energy weapons hit the human vessel. They hit it. The plating held. Not all of it, there were stress points. In the outer armor that buckled, areas that glowed hot on the sensor display. Two of the small armor panels on the starboard side that sheared away. The human ship was taking damage, real damage, but it was not the kind of damage that 11 destroyers and 6 cruisers should have been doing to a vessel of that size. The human ship fired back. Not all guns at once, it was careful about it, which was the most frightening thing, careful and methodical the way someone does a job. They are very good at it. Pick targets, not the biggest ships, not the dreadnoughts, which would have been obvious tactical choice. It picked the fastest ships, the destroyers that were repositioning, the two light cruisers that had moved to flank it. It picked the ships that were the most mobile, the most dangerous at close range. It fired 4 times in the next 40 seconds. 4 more Verk ships were gone. The human vessel had taken down 5 ships in under 2 minutes. The Imperial fleet was still coming, still firing. The dreadnoughts had their main guns charged now, and both of them released at the same moment, a coordinated strike that hit the human vessel amidships with enough energy to crack the hull of a battle carrier. The hull cracked. A section of it, maybe 40 m of the outer plating, tore away and spun off into the dark. The human vessel's gun on that side went quiet. The fleet took the opening. 4 destroyers pushed toward the damaged section, trying to get close, trying to get inside the effective range of those projectile weapons. Energy weapons worked better at close range. The plan was not wrong, except the shuttle that had been floating quietly for 6 days in open space chose that moment to do something. It was small, not armed, the sensors had suggested, but the sensors had also said the large vessel was probably a traveling ship and had been wrong about that too. The shuttle moved fast, faster than any shuttle Voss had seen. It moved in a straight line directly toward the 4 destroyers, pushing toward the damaged section of the large vessel. The destroyers adjusted weapons tracking. They targeted the shuttle. The shuttle's hull opened on one side panel like a smaller version of the ones on the large vessel. 1 barrel, 1 gun. It fired 6 times in 4 seconds at ranges the Ver gunners had never practiced against, because nothing had ever gotten that close to a fleet ship that fast. 6 shots. 3 hit, the other 3 missed by margins that were close enough to damage sensor arrays and communications equipment. 2 destroyers were gone. 1 was spinning, its engines dead, its crew alive. The shuttle was past them into the middle of the formation before anyone could track it. What happened next was not a battle, it was a lesson. The shuttle moved through the fleet the way a hornet moves through a room full of large things that cannot quite catch it. It was small enough that the big guns on the Verk ships could not track it at the angles it was moving. The destroyers tried. They hit each other twice before Kreth ordered them to stop firing at the shuttle and hold position. The shuttle rolled around a cruiser's engine housing, fired twice at point-blank range into the hull plating. Not enough to destroy it, but enough. And then pulled away and was 3 km distant before the cruiser could turn. Its weapons. Kreth pulled her fleet back, all of it. She ordered a full withdrawal to the border of Sector 9, and she ordered it in a voice that was completely steady. And that gave Voss no indication of what it had cost her to give that command. The shooting stopped. The human vessel sat in the debris field, half its starboard guns still open, a long scarf exposed in her hull. On its port side glowing hot. The shuttle circled it once slowly and then stopped moving. The fleet had lost 7 ships. The human vessel had lost nothing. It was damaged, it was not gone. Voss did the count again because the first count felt like a mistake. 7 ships in 4 minutes. He looked at the count and looked at the display, and then he sent a message to Fleet Command that he knew was going to change the direction of everything. The message said, "We have engaged. Engagement was not successful. Request immediate reinforcement and new tactical assessment." Fleet Command's response came back in 11 minutes. Reinforcements coming. Do not re-engage without authorization. How many ships does the human vessel have in total? Voss looked at the display. The large vessel, the shuttle, 2 he sent back. The response took longer that time. News of the engagement spread through Varak space in a way that Kreth could not control, because 7 ships dying in 4 minutes generated emergency signals and distress beacons that other ships and stations in nearby sectors picked up before anyone could put a classification on the reports. By the time Fleet Command issued a media blackout order, 40,000 Varak citizens already knew that something had happened at Outpost Kreth, that ships had been lost and that whatever had done it was still out there. The galaxy was not just Varak, that was something the Empire was sometimes tempted to forget, but the reality was that the Varak Empire shared its edges with several other species. They were lesser in the Empire's accounting, the Thrax, who were sharp-minded traders and built elegant ships but had no taste for war, the Orvani, whose rebellion Kreth had crushed 20 years ago and who had been quiet since, building their colony ships and expanding slowly into the territories the Empire allowed them. The Pelari, who were ancient and strained and very old and who mostly kept to their own space and did not interest anyone. These species had their own networks, their own information channels and news that moved fast, and Varak space moved faster in places where the Empire's communication controls did not apply. Within 48 hours of the battle, every Thrax trading station within 200 light years was buzzing with the report. Within 4 days, it had reached Orvani space. Within a week, the Pelari, who were rumored to know things before they happened, sent a message to no one in particular, just a general broadcast that said only, "We have been watching with interest." The humans, for their part, went back to scanning the debris field. Voss received a communication from the human vessel on the day after the battle, not from the second voice, the deep, slow one from a third voice. This one was quieter, measured. It said, "We didn't want that to happen. We weren't here for that. We were looking for our people. If any of your crew from those ships survived, we can help you recover them. We have medical equipment. We're not your enemies." Voss passed the message to Kreth. Kreth held on to it for an hour, then she sent back formally, through official channels, "Your offer is noted. State your intentions." The third voice said, "Same as before. Find our people, go home. Kreth asked, you destroyed 7 Imperial vessels, what do you call that? The voice was quiet for a moment. Then, we call that being very unhappy about being shot at first. Voss was in the room when Kreth read the transcript. He watched her face. She didn't react. She had very good control of her face. But she turned to Voss afterward when they were alone and she said, they built the guns into the ship because they expected to need them. They came here looking for one missing vessel, and they came armed for a fleet engagement. Voss said, they said they didn't know this was our space. Kreth said, no, they said they didn't know there was asterisk anyone out. Here she paused. That's different. It means they armed their ships as a habit, not because they knew they were coming. To us, they arm everything because all space is something they take seriously. She looked out the observation window at the distant shape of the human vessel. 200 years, she said, more to herself than to him. They've been in space for 200 years and they already think like this. The Emperor, receiving Kreth's full report of the engagement and its aftermath, did not respond immediately. This was unusual. The Emperor was not a man who took time to think. He was a man who reacted quickly and let other people clean up. The fact that he went quiet for 18 hours suggested he was, for the first time in a long while, not sure what to do. What he did eventually was what he always did when he was not sure. He called a council. The council met on Verk Prime in the great chamber where the Empire's decisions were made. 20 senators, 8 admirals, the Emperor's personal intelligence chief, and because the Emperor had a pragmatic side that most people underestimated, a single historian whose specialty was first contact events in the Empire's past. The historian, an old female named Cess, said something that the others did not like but could not argue with. She said, every time the Empire has met a new species and reacted with force, immediately it has either destroyed something it later needed or created something it later feared. This is the 3rd time in our history that we have encountered a species with genuine military capability in the first days of contact. In the previous 2 cases, we won the engagement and spent the next century managing the consequences. The Emperor said, and the difference this time, Cess said, the previous 2 cases we knew where they came from. We knew their space and their population and their resources. We could measure them. We cannot measure these humans. We do not know what is waiting for us at a star 4,000 light-years south. The Emperor said, we could find out. Cess said, yes, they found us. That landed. The council was quiet. In Sector 9, the human vessel continued scanning the debris field. On the 3rd day after the battle, it stopped scanning. The 3rd voice came on the channel and said simply, we found them. The colony ship was not intact. Voss had already suspected it wouldn't be. Nothing survived long in a debris field like that one, but the human vessel pulled up the wreckage carefully, piece by piece, and sorted through it for 3 days, and by the end of those 3 days they had recovered what they said were the remains of everyone who had been aboard. 600 people. The large vessel sat still while they did this. The shuttle did not come out. No one on the Vurek side said anything. Even the Emperor, watching the reports, said nothing. There was something in the act of watching a species recover its dead Carefully, completely, over 3 slow days. That was hard to give an order. Over. When it was done, the third voice came on the channel and said, "We're ready to talk properly if you want." Kreth looked at Voss. Voss looked at the display. The human vessel, damaged and quiet, sitting in a debris field next to the remains of a ship full of people it had come 4,000 light years to find. "Yes," Kreth said into the channel, "we want." The talks lasted 9 days. Kreth conducted them from her flagship, relayed through Voss's station because she did not trust the communication delay of routing everything through Fleet Command. She did not tell Fleet Command this. She simply set up the channel and began. On the human side, the third voice became a face. A visual channel opened. On the 4th day after both parties spent 3 days sending written messages, the face that appeared on Kreth's display was not what any of the xenobiologists had expected. They had expected something. They had run probability models based on the biology of known species and had generated lists of likely features, external sensory organs, limb count, body plan. What they had not generated, because it had never been in their data, was a species that looked almost exactly like a Verk. Not exactly close, closer than any species the Empire had ever encountered. Bilateral symmetry, 4 limbs, 2 sensory organs on the front of a rounded cranium, a mouth, an internal skeleton. The features of the face were different. Flatter in some places, rounder in others, different eye placement, different skin texture, but the overall plan was the same. The xenobiologists were still writing reports about it when the talks ended. The human across from Kreth was named Director Chen. She was the vessel's senior diplomat, which meant humans put diplomats on warships, which Kreth filed away without comment. Director Chen spoke the trade language. Well, by then, the vessel had been running its translation systems the entire time, and every conversation added to its database. She had a way of being direct without being rude, which Kreth respected. The talks covered the obvious things: territorial acknowledgement, the battle, compensation questions, not financial but formal, for the ships lost. Chen acknowledged that the human vessel had fired first in the full sense, even if the Verk shot had landed first. She said this without being defensive about it, which Kreth found interesting. "You moved your ship into the path of a warning shot," Kreth said on the 6th day. "Our pilot made an error," Chen said. "Our analysts believe the movement was intentional." A pause. "Your analysts might be right. I wasn't in the cockpit." Kreth pressed it. "If it was intentional, your pilot used our warning shot as a justification to open fire." Chen looked at her steadily. "If that happened, it was wrong, and we'd have lost 7 ships and gotten a very clear picture of your weapons capability before you knew what ours looked like. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying I can see how an analyst who trusted their data might read it that way." Kreth sat with that. On the human side, Chen was reporting back to someone. Voss could tell because her eyes moved sometimes to point off screen, and she paused before answering questions in ways that were not uncertainty but coordination. Someone was feeding her information. The vessel's chain of command was running in parallel with the negotiations. On the 8th day, the talks hit a wall. The wall was the Emperor. A message arrived from Verk Prime, not through Kreth's command structure, directly to the communication array on Outpost Creve in the Emperor's personal cipher. It took Voss's communications officer 20 minutes to decrypt it. When she did, she read it twice and then called Voss over, with the particular careful expression of someone holding hot material. The message did not address the talks. It addressed the military situation. It told Voss, not Kreth, Voss, that 240 ships were being assembled at the nearest fleet staging point. It told him that this force would arrive in the sector in 11 days. It told him that the political office had determined the talks were stalling, and that a demonstration of imperial resolve was necessary. The message was not classified. It was not encrypted beyond the personal cipher, which any reasonably equipped intelligence system could crack with a few hours of work. The Emperor was sending 240 ships and telling Voss about it in a message that the humans could almost certainly read if they wanted to. It took Voss about 4 minutes of looking at the ceiling to understand this. The message was not intelligence. The message was a statement. The Emperor wanted the humans to know the ships were coming. He was ending the talks without ending the talks, letting them run out on their own while the fleet arrived to finish the argument. Voss sent the message to Kreth. Kreth read it. She sent back 2 words. I see. Then she went back to the talks and continued them for 1 more day, as if the message had not arrived. On the 9th day she told Chen directly, I have to tell you something. Chen said, we know the ships. Kreth said, how long have you known? Since the message was sent. Chen's expression was neutral. We have good signal intercept capabilities. Your cipher is old. Kreth said, what are you going to do? Chen looked at her for a long moment. Ask you something. Is this decision coming from you or from someone above you? From above me. Is it a decision you would make yourself? Kreth said nothing for 3 seconds, which was an answer. Chen nodded. That's what I thought. She looked off to the side again, listening to whoever was in her ear. Then she looked back. We're not going to run. I want to be clear about that, but we're also not going to start the next fight. If your ships come here and they come at us, that's on them. We'll respond to what happens. That's all we ever do. The talks ended. The 240 ships arrived in 11 days, as promised. They came in 3 groups, dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the sector, forming up into a battle formation that Voss had never seen used in his career, because there had never been a reason to use it. It was the formation for total elimination, the kind that left no debris field worth sorting through. The human vessel watched them arrive. It did not power up its guns. It did not move. The shuttle was out of its bay again. Voss had noticed it tended to come out when something was about to happen. He did not know if this was meaningful. Fleet Admiral Rand took command of the combined force. He outranked Kreth. He had been sent specifically because the Emperor trusted him to be decisive in a way the Emperor had apparently decided Kreth was not. Rand was a large man, broad-shouldered by Verk standards, with a long service record that was built mostly on being overwhelming. He did not negotiate. He positioned his forces, and he gave his enemy 1 chance to stand down. He gave the human vessel 1 chance. The message went out, stand down. Surrender the vessel, await Imperial Processing. The third voice, it was always the third voice in direct confrontations. Voss had. Notice not Chen, not the casual first voice came back and said, "We've heard this before, you know how this goes." Rand opened fire with 240 ships. What happened next was not what any computer model predicted. The models had run the numbers, 240 warships against one large vessel, and a shuttle. The vessel had 42 guns per side, possibly more that had not been used yet. The shuttle was a fast attack craft of unknown capability. The models gave the Empire a 97% probability of success in under 20 minutes of engagement. The models showed the vessel going dark in 12 minutes, the shuttle neutralized in 4. The models were wrong in one specific way. The models had assumed the human vessel was alone. It was not alone. It had been alone when it arrived. It had been alone during the talks, but at some point in the 11 days while the Empire's fleet was staging, while the Emperor was sending his message, and Kreth was having her last conversations with Chen, and the xenobiologists were finishing their reports, something had changed. The human vessel had been transmitting. Not on any channel the Verk monitored closely because it was on a band so high in frequency it had been classified as background radiation and filtered out. But it had been transmitting, and the transmissions had been going somewhere. In the first minute of the engagement, while the Empire's 240 ships were opening fire on the large vessel, and the large vessel was responding, the long-range sensor arrays on the edge of the sector picked something up. Multiple transition signatures. A lot of them coming from the galactic south. Voss was watching the long-range display when the signatures resolved into shapes. Ship shapes, many ship shapes moving fast in a formation that was tight and practiced, dropping out of FTL in a spread that put them at the edge of sensor range. He counted the contacts. He counted them again. He called to Doc, who had been on the console for 18 hours straight. "Doc. Long-range contacts, southwest quadrant. What am I looking at?" Doc looked. Doc processed. Doc, who was thorough and professional and had managed to sound calm through everything that had happened in the last 3 weeks, said, "Commander, I count 63 contacts." 63. The human vessel they had been fighting for 3 weeks, the one that had destroyed 7 ships in 4 minutes, the one that had sat quiet in a debris field, recovering its dead, the one that had talked for 9 days, was apparently a scout ship. 63 more ships had just arrived. Rand received the contact report in the middle of his engagement. He pulled his lead ships back slightly. He was decisive, not stupid. He reassessed. The 63 new ships did not open fire. They took up positions at the edge of the sector, spread wide, covering every vector, not aggressive positions. Watching positions, the same way you stand when you want to make sure someone understands that if they continue what they're doing, the math will change. A new voice came on the channel, not any of the 3 voices from before. This one was older, slower, tired in the way that people who have been in charge of large, dangerous things for a long time get tired. It said, "I'm the admiral of this fleet. My name is Vasquez. I've been briefed on what's happened here. I want to talk to whoever's in charge of yours." Fleet Admiral Rand, to his credit, responded immediately. He identified himself. He asked the question that was In every Verk mind at that moment, how many ships do you have? Vasquez said enough, and we didn't bring all of them. I left some at home, in case someone tried to visit while we were out. Rand looked at his 240 ships. He looked at the 63 new contacts. He looked at the battered human vessel still returning fire in the middle of his formation, still fighting with a section of hull torn open and 3 of its guns dark, and 3 more that were not dark and were making themselves very clear about it. He kept his ships in position. He was not going to retreat from a question, but he stopped advancing. He said, "What do you want?" Vasquez said, "Same thing we've always wanted, to talk, to find out who you are, to go home and tell our people what's out here. We've been hoping for this, actually, meeting other intelligent species. We've been looking for a long time." Rand said, "You brought 63 warships to a conversation." Vasquez said, "You brought 240. Silence on the channel. Rand said, "Your vessel entered our space without authorization." Vasquez said, "We know, we've established that. We'd like to move past it." On the far side of the sector, the Thrax listening post that had been monitoring everything for 2 weeks sent a message to their home council. The Orvani ambassador to Verk Prime requested an emergency meeting with the Emperor's Foreign Office, the Pelari, ancient and strange and interested in everything, sent another of their broadcasts to no one in particular. This one said, "We have been watching with great interest. We would like to speak with the humans." The galaxy, which had been the Verk Empire's to organize for 400 years, was reorganizing itself around a new variable. The Emperor, watching the reports from Verk Prime, looked at the count of human ships in the sector and the count of Verk ships, and then he looked at the stars chart on his office wall, the one that showed the galactic south as empty. He made a decision. He picked up his personal communication channel and he said the words that ended one thing and started another. "Tell Rand to hold his fire." The ceasefire held for 3 hours before anyone trusted it. Fleet Admiral Rand kept his ships in formation, weapons charged, every gun crew at their stations. Admiral Vasquez kept the 63 human ships at the edge of the sector, spread wide, watching. In the middle, the original vessel sat in the debris field, battered, one full side of guns dark, a long tear in its hull still glowing at the edges where the metal had been burned, and did not move. The shuttle was still out. Voss watched it all from the command deck of Outpost Krev and felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, something that was not quite fear and not quite awe, but lived in the neighborhood of both. The ceasefire held. At the 6-hour mark, Director Chen requested a face-to-face meeting, not a screen call, a physical meeting. Person on neutral ground, meaning she suggested the station itself, Outpost Krev. She proposed coming over in the shuttle with a small group and sitting across a table from the Verk officers. Rand denied the request, too risky. Kreth, who had been officially replaced as senior commander but who was still on her flagship and still involved in everything, sent a private message to Voss. It said, "Tell Fleet Admiral Rand that the humans have been asking to talk since the beginning, that they are offering to come to us rather than asking us to go to them, and that the last 3 weeks happened because we stopped talking and started shooting. He can draw his own conclusions." Voss forwarded the message. Rand sat with it for 2 hours. Then he approved the request. The shuttle docked at Outpost Kreth at the 14th hour of the ceasefire. Voss was in the docking bay when it arrived. He had brought 8 guards, which was half what Rand wanted and twice what Kreth suggested. The shuttle was smaller up close than he expected, not small, but the scale of it felt different when it was in the bay, surrounded by the familiar metal walls of the station, than it had when it was moving through open space. The door of the shuttle opened. They came out 3 at a time. There were 9 of them in total. Voss had looked at the visual feeds from the negotiations and had some sense of what humans looked like, but the feed had been small and the images had been flat. In person, in the docking bay, the impression was different. They were about the same height as Verk. On average, some shorter, one tall. Enough that Voss had to look up slightly. They snorts moved with a particular kind of ease, not aggressive, not submissive, just comfortable. Way something moves when it is in an unfamiliar place and has decided not to be bothered by that. They wore fitted suits with minimal ornamentation and carried nothing visible. Their faces were doing many things at once which seemed to be normal for them. One of them was looking at the ceiling with something that read as curiosity. 2 were looking at the guards with something that read as assessment, and Director Chen in the front was looking directly at Voss with something that was simply attention. She held out one hand, palm up, fingers together. Voss did not know what the gesture meant. He found out later it was a greeting, a peace gesture, open hand, nothing held. He put up his own hand, palm forward, which was the Verk equivalent. She nodded, he nodded. They went inside. The meeting room was too small for both groups, and all the guards Rand had wanted, which was probably why Kreth had suggested fewer guards. They sat around a table designed for Verk officers at a Verk outpost, and the human chairs were slightly too low and the table slightly too high, and nobody said anything about it. Voss respected that. Small discomforts ignored. Told you something about people. Chen spoke first. She started with the colony ship. She gave the names of everyone who had been aboard, not a list, not a data file, but named some of them, the ones she knew personally. She said them the way you say names that belonged to real people who were real before they became a reason for something. She said, we want you to know that finding them mattered, all of it. Everything that happened, it mattered. Because of them, we're sorry for the ships we destroyed. We're sorry for the lives lost on both sides. We want this to be the last time that happens. Rand, who had joined via communication, screened because he was not willing to come to the station himself, asked the question that had been waiting since the first day. He said, how many ships do your people have? Chen looked at him on the screen. She said, enough. It was the same answer Vasquez had given. Voss had the strong impression it was a deliberate echo. Rand said, that is not an answer. Chen said, it is though. It's the answer to question about whether you can defeat us. The actual number is more information than you need right now, and less reassuring than enough, so I'll stick with enough. Rand's face did something complicated. Voss said, to move things along, the question we actually need to answer is, what happens next? Chen looked at him. Something in her expression shifted. It was not warmth. Exactly, more like recognition. She said, yes, that's the one. What happened next took a long time to negotiate and a much longer time to implement, but its shape became clear in that first meeting and did not change much afterward. The humans wanted contact, official, structured mutual contact. They wanted to know who the Verks were, and they wanted the Verks to know who they were. They wanted trade routes and communication channels and an exchange of information that would go both ways. They were specific about the both ways part. They did not want to be studied. They were willing to learn and be learned from in equal measure. They wanted, above everything else, to not be a threat. Chen said it plainly, we are not trying to take your space. We have plenty of space. You have no idea how much space we have. We've been in the Galactic South for 200 years, and we've barely started. We don't want your territory. We want neighbors. Rand said, you arrived with a warship. Chen said, we arrived with a search and rescue vessel that happened to be armed. All our vessels are armed. We learned early on that space is not safe. It's not personal. Voss said, what did you learn it from? The question landed in the room and stayed there. Chen looked at him steadily. She said, other things, not here, not in your space. We've met other species. Some of them were not interested in talking. The room absorbed this. 200 years in space, armed ships as a habit, a rescue vessel the size of a heavy cruiser, 63 ships that arrived when called from 4,000 light-years away in 11 days. Voss did the math on that last one quietly in his head. 4,000 light-years in 11 days was a speed that the Verk Empire could not match. With its best drives, not even close. He said nothing about it in the meeting, but he thought about it for a long time. Afterward, the full report that came out of the meeting and the meetings that followed over the next 2 months as the talks moved from Outpost Krev to formal diplomatic channels contained one section that was classified above all others. It was the section on human history. The analysts who compiled it had worked from the data package the humans had provided on the first day, cross-reference with everything Chen and her colleagues had shared during the talks. They had checked it against Galactic records, against stellar surveys, against the Empire's own historical archives going back 800 years. The section said in careful, measured language, humans had been on their planet for at least 300,000 years. They had been building organized civilizations for roughly 10,000. They had spent most of those 10,000 years in conflict with each other, wars, collapses, rebuilding more wars. They had nearly destroyed themselves multiple times, including once with weapons of a kind that the analysts flagged as genuinely planet-threatening. They had survived each time. They had reached space 200 years ago. In 200 years, they had built an interstellar civilization that spanned enough of the galactic south to send 63 ships to a crisis point 4,000 light years from home without significant delay. They had done this while, by their own account, still having internal disagreements, still making mistakes, still arguing with each other about the right way to do things. They had not had anyone to learn from. No older civilization had guided them. No established empire had given them technology or trade or a framework to build on. Everything they had built from Nothing by themselves, starting on one small planet around one unremarkable star. The analyst who wrote the final summary of this section added one line that was not in the official report template. It was not strictly necessary. She added it because she had been working on the section for 3 weeks, and she needed to say it somewhere, even if only in a document that would be read by 12 people. She wrote they were alone for a very long time and they came out the other side of it like this. The Emperor read the full report in his private office on Virk Prime. He read it once, then he sat for a while, then he read the classified section again. He had been emperor for 60 years. He had seen empires fall and be absorbed. He had seen species rise and collapse. He had a very precise understanding of power and where it lived and how long it lasted. He summoned his senior council. He said, "We are going to open formal diplomatic relations with these humans." Senator Vra, the loudest voice for continuing the military option, said, "The Senate will require justification." The Emperor said, "The justification is that we are not stupid." Vra said, "They have shown themselves to be." The Emperor said, "Dangerous, yes, also honest, also disciplined enough to stop shooting when they could have kept going, also capable of traveling 4,000 light years to recover the bodies of 600 people." He paused. "When we go to war with species, Senator, we pick the ones we can beat. We do not pick the ones that arm their rescue ships." Vra was quiet. The Emperor looked at his council. "The known galaxy has just gotten larger. We will adjust." It was not a perfect ending to the conflict. Nothing that had happened was clean enough for a perfect ending. The families of the Virk crews lost in the engagement filed formal complaints that went through the Senate for years. Fleet Admiral Rand submitted 3 separate memos arguing the military option had been abandoned prematurely, each of which the Emperor read and filed. Without response, the Orvani, who had watched everything from a careful distance, sent a formal request to open their own communication channel with the humans, which the Empire approved after considerable argument, because it was not something the Empire could reasonably refuse without making the argument for exactly the kind of empire the humans did not want to be neighbors with. Voss was promoted. He was given command of the first formal contact station between Virk and human space, built on neutral ground at a midpoint between the 2 territories, which was itself a concept that required new maps. Kreth retired the year after. She lived long, and she wrote a book that was not officially allowed and was widely read. Anyway, Chen went home and came back as ambassador, which was a title that the humans had for a person who stood between 2 things and tried to keep them from hitting each other. The original vessel, the one that had appeared in Sector 9 without an arrival event and sat there in the dark, with its hull full of guns and its belly full of purpose, was repaired and returned to human space. Before it left, Voss was allowed to come aboard, just him and a small team, escorted by humans who were professional and watchful and not unfriendly. He walked the corridors. They were long and wide, and the ceiling was higher than Virk standard. The walls had things on them, images, text in the human script, photographs he now knew to call photographs because he had learned the word. Some of the photographs were of people. He understood that the people in them were the crew, and the people the crew cared about. He walked past the engineering section, where the hull damage was still being patched and the repair crews human. Engineers, young, focused, looked up at him without hostility. One of them nodded. He nodded back. He walked to the forward section. The gun ports were, and the guns themselves, which were beautiful in the specific way that very well-made things are beautiful regardless of what they are made to do. He stood in the forward observation room, which was a bubble of transparent material at the very nose of the ship, and he looked out at the stars. The chief engineer of the vessel, a woman named Park, who had a direct way of speaking and no patience for long silences, came and stood next to him. She said, "You want to know how we got here without showing up on your sensors?" He said, "Yes." She said, "We'll get there. Give us some time." He said, "Is that a yes?" She looked at him with the same kind of expression Croth had sometimes used on subordinates who asked good questions badly. "It's a not yet," she said, "which isn't the same thing." He nodded. They stood together for a moment looking at the stars. The stars were the same from here as from anywhere, old and cold and far away and completely indifferent to what happened between small things in the spaces between them. "You came a long way to find dead people," Voss said. He had not planned to say it. It came out. Park was quiet for a moment, then she said, "They were hours, dead or alive." Voss thought about the sensor record of those 3 days in the debris field. The careful, methodical work, the patience. He said, "You knew they were dead before you got here." Park said, "Probably, but you don't know until you look, and you look." He understood something then that the analysts reported, gestured at, but not quite reached. He understood it standing in the nose of a ship he could not have designed, next to a person who had traveled further than most Verk ships had ever gone for the purpose of looking, when you probably already knew they had been alone for a very long time, and they had come out the other side of it like this. Not soft, not easy, not without weapons or edges or the hard particular knowledge of what it costs to survive, without help, but here, present looking. Voss looked at the stars for a while longer, and then he went back to the station and got to work.